One morning, in late October 2017, the peaceful town of Gray in eastern France was shaken by the news that a young woman had gone missing. Her name was Alexia Daval, a 29-year-old bank employee, the eldest daughter of Jean-Pierre and Isabelle Fouillot, long regarded as the pride of her family. She had soft brown hair, bright eyes, and a gentle smile that made her instantly likable to anyone she met. The townspeople were familiar with the sight of Alexia and her husband, Jonathann Daval, jogging together through the tree-lined streets every morning. They were seen as the perfect couple, young, healthy, and in harmony both in work and in life. So when Alexia disappeared, it struck at the very heart of the community, forcing everyone to look again at what they thought they knew, and to wonder how many tragedies hide behind closed doors. Before we begin this heartbreaking story, take a moment to share how your day is going. I hope you're safe and well. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a comment so we can continue uncovering the dark secrets behind the true crimes you're most curious about. Alexia was born in 1988, graduated in banking, and worked at a local branch. In 2015, she married Jonathann, a quiet computer engineer she had known since her teenage years. Both shared a passion for sports, especially running, and often signed up for amateur races in the region. The Fouillot family adored their son-in-law. Jonathann affectionately called his in-laws Maman and Papa, joined them for dinner every weekend, and spent holidays under the same roof. To outsiders, theirs was the picture of an ideal home. Two young professionals, deeply in love, fully supported by their families. Yet beneath that peaceful surface, small cracks had begun to form. The pressure to have children, the expectations from family, and Jonathann's increasingly withdrawn nature gradually created distance between them. Friends noticed Alexia seemed tense at times, while her once gentle husband grew quieter, avoiding conversations about starting a family. They still appeared together in public, still smiled in family photos, but beneath the surface lay an unspoken exhaustion. And when Alexia vanished that morning, no one could have imagined that behind the calm facade of a reserved husband was a storm waiting to destroy everything. Alexia was a dynamic, independent woman with deep, emotional intelligence. She had a stable career in banking, took good care of herself, loved sports, and longed to build a complete family. Yet behind those smiling photographs lay a quiet pain that only she and her husband understood. For years, they had tried to have a child, but without success. They turned to fertility treatments, hospital visits marked by tension, exhaustion, and fragile hope. The longer they waited, the heavier the atmosphere at home became. According to friends, Alexia often confided that her husband was too passive, lacked ambition, and preferred to stay within his comfort zone. She wanted a more vibrant life, travel, career growth, new experiences, while he sought only stability and routine. What began as a small difference slowly widened into an invisible gap, eroding the passion that once bound them. Alexia spoke more, wanting change. Jonathann withdrew, silent, letting resentment fester like an unhealed wound. Jonathann carried within him the weight of an incomplete childhood. His father had died when he was just 12, leaving a void that shaped him into a reserved, sensitive man, obsessed with order, cleanliness, and control. After marrying, he moved close to Alexia's family, who embraced him warmly as one of their own. To her parents, he was gentle and considerate, calling them Mom and Dad, helping with chores, and joining in family dinners filled with laughter. No one suspected that behind this obedient exterior was a man living in constant contradiction. Later investigations revealed that Jonathann had a habit of lying and performing to fit each situation. Alexia's sister recalled, lying was his way of life, a habit so ingrained that even he struggled to distinguish truth from fiction. He once told his in-laws he had a terrible relationship with his mother, yet secretly visited her every day. He claimed to take sick leave for health reasons, but in reality, he was simply retreating to his mother's house to escape the pressure. The image of a kind, well-mannered man had become a mask he could no longer remove. And that very fragility, the desperate need to be loved, the fear of conflict, and the suppressed anger simmering beneath, would become the crucial piece that set in motion a tragedy beyond imagination. On the morning of the 28th of October 2017, Jonathann reported that his wife had gone out for her usual morning run and never returned. Around 11 a.m., he went to his in-laws' house to tell them that Alexia was missing. Family, friends, and the entire town of Gray immediately mobilized to search along the trails she often used. At the time, Jonathann wept constantly, wiping his tears as he told everyone how worried he was, how his wife had never been gone this long before. He said she had taken her phone but wasn't answering. He posted desperate messages on social media and appeared in local media, pleading for anyone with information to come forward. The whole town seemed to be swept up in the collective effort, from local joggers to police officers, with sniffer dogs combing the nearby forests. 2 days later, on October 30, Alexia's body was discovered in a secluded wooded area near the village of Esmolins, just a few kilometers from home. Her remains had been burned, her clothes charred, wrapped in a bedsheet. Forensic experts determined that she had been beaten and strangled before being set on fire. The brutal nature of her death sent shockwaves across France. Thousands attended her memorial, bringing flowers and photographs of the young woman. In Gray, a silent march of around 10,000 people took place, participants holding candles and Alexia's portrait, calling for an end to violence against women. Her mother spoke to the crowd, saying that by running and remembering Alexia, people had turned her daughter into a symbol of women's freedom, to run, to live, to breathe. Images from the funeral and memorials further solidified the narrative of a grieving husband. Jonathann appeared visibly exhausted, his eyes red and swollen, often clinging to his mother-in-law while clutching white flowers. He attended the funeral, walked beside the casket, and repeatedly called Alexia, "my oxygen," the words of a man seemingly broken by loss. The media portrayed him as the tragic widower, and all of France was moved and enraged, believing that the real killer was still at large. At prayer vigils, he wore his wedding suit, held his ring close, and vowed never to stop seeking justice for his wife. The image of a devoted husband, mourning his beloved wife, was powerful, touching, and utterly deceiving. In the first days after the murder, investigators focused on finding a possible stranger who might have attacked Alexia while she was out jogging. But as the data was carefully analyzed, the picture began to shift. Forensic experts discovered tire tracks near the crime scene that matched those of Jonathann's car. The vehicle's GPS revealed that he had left home early that morning, driven in the exact direction of the Esmolins woods, and returned shortly before going to his in-laws' house to report his wife missing. When forensic teams examined the sheet used to wrap the body, it turned out to be identical to the ones used in the couple's home. Piece by piece, investigators connected the dots. The tearful husband on television, the suspicious car route, the familiar bedsheet, all the clues seemed to point in one direction. Jonathann's colleagues told police that he frequently took sick leave, sometimes disappearing for days at a time. They described him as quiet and introverted, but often complaining about the pressures of his marriage. To the investigators, the image of the devoted husband began to crumble. On the 30th of January 2018, after more than 30 hours of interrogation, Jonathann Daval finally broke down and confessed. He had killed his wife. He claimed that during a heated argument, Alexia had been aggressive and said things that deeply humiliated him. In a fit of rage, he punched her repeatedly in the face, slammed her head against a concrete wall, and strangled her until she lost consciousness. Believing she was dead, he panicked, loaded her body into his car, drove to the woods, and tried to cover up what he had done. Jonathann insisted it was a spur-of-the-moment act, born out of emotions he had bottled up for too long. But his story soon unraveled. When questioned about the burning of the body, Jonathann first claimed that the corpse had caught fire due to friction, An absurd excuse, quickly disproven when traces of gasoline were found on Alexia's clothing. Experts concluded that he had deliberately set the body on fire to destroy evidence. In his confession, Jonathann said his wife often reproached him for his infertility and declining desire, making him feel powerless and inadequate. He described their final argument as being about having children, claiming her words cut into his pride like a knife, and that he had completely lost control, like an animal cornered with no way out. But to the public, no excuse could ever cleanse such an act. Pressure, arguments, personal pain, none of it could justify a man taking the life of the woman he once swore to love. Jonathann's confession not only exposed the grim truth behind the Daval family's tragedy, but also forced France to confront a chilling question. How many model husbands are secretly harboring storms of violence within? In the days following his confession, Jonathann Daval revealed even more horrifying details. He admitted to wrapping his wife's body in a bedsheet, dragging it to his car, and driving to the wooded area near Esmoulins, where Alexia's remains would later be found. He recounted how, after leaving her body there, he returned home, showered, changed clothes, and went about his day as if nothing had happened. That evening, he went back to the site, carrying a jerrycan of gasoline and a lighter. He poured the fuel over her body and set it ablaze, trying to erase every trace blood, fingerprints, even the sheet used to wrap her. He confessed that he was terrified, trembling, yet still composed enough to plan his actions carefully. He had chosen a hidden, isolated spot, covered the body with leaves details that proved he was fully aware of what he was doing. Those deliberate choices shattered his defense of losing control in a moment of rage. Jonathann had acted coldly, methodically, with complete understanding of his crime. Even after confessing, he tried to salvage the image of a good but fragile husband. Jonathann claimed he never meant to hurt Alexia, that he loved her, and that burning the body was simply an act of panic. A desperate attempt to erase the horrifying scene, not to hide his guilt. His lawyer built on that narrative, arguing that Jonathann was a victim of emotional pressure, overwhelmed by stress and illness, and that he had acted in a moment of breakdown. But the police didn't buy it. They uncovered a long pattern of deceit, faking illness to skip work, pretending to hate his mother while secretly visiting her daily, telling his in-laws he was lonely to gain their sympathy. Investigators saw him as a double-faced manipulator, skilled at winning people's trust while carefully managing his image. Those layers of lies made the notion of an impulsive emotional act absurd. They concluded that Jonathann had a calculating mind, capable of playing the victim, and that was what made his crime all the more terrifying. Then, in June 2018, when the public believed everything had been settled, Jonathann suddenly retracted his confession. He accused his wife's brother-in-law, Gregory Gay, of being the real killer. In this fabricated version, Alexia had suffered a violent episode, and Gay had tried to restrain her, accidentally strangling her to death. Afterward, the entire family supposedly conspired to cover up the crime and forced Jonathann to take the blame. The claim sent fresh shockwaves through France. Gregory Gay immediately denounced the story as a lie, while Alexia's parents, who had once loved Jonathann like their own son, felt a sense of betrayal beyond words. They publicly declared there was no conspiracy, no alternate story, only one truth. Jonathann was the man who murdered their daughter. Investigators saw his sudden reversal as nothing more than a desperate attempt to escape the heavy sentence looming over him. The once beloved image of the grieving husband had completely collapsed. Jonathann Daval now stood revealed for what he truly was: a liar, willing to trample on the memory of the dead and the love of an entire family just to save himself. From the moment Jonathann withdrew his confession, his relationship with the Fouillot family was shattered beyond repair. The man once treated as a beloved son turned his back on them, accusing his brother-in-law of murder and dragging a grieving family into yet another spiral of agony. Alexia's parents, who had held him close at their daughter's funeral, felt a betrayal so deep it defied comprehension. They could not fathom how the same man who had once sobbed and called Alexia the oxygen of my life could now coldly blame those who had opened their home and hearts to him. Public sympathy evaporated overnight. The French press, which had once portrayed Jonathann as a heartbroken widower, now branded him a two-faced liar. Social media exploded with outrage. People condemned his attempt to shift blame not only as cowardice, but as a second act of cruelty toward the victim's family. The Foulios publicly declared they no longer considered him family and demanded he face the harshest sentence possible. On the 7th of December 2018, a confrontation between Jonathann and the Fouliot family took place at the Besançon courthouse, a turning point in the case. The air in the interrogation room was thick with tension. One by one, family members faced him, the man who had once been their son-in-law, now the killer, to hear the truth from his own mouth. Alexia's mother, Isabel, carried a photograph of her daughter holding her cat. Happy, the same picture that once hung in their living room. When she raised it silently and looked straight at him, Jonathann began to tremble. His eyes darted, his breathing quickened, and finally he broke down in tears. He collapsed, admitting once again that he had killed Alexia. He confessed that accusing his brother-in-law had been a lie, that he had been haunted by guilt and fear, and had tried to run from what he'd done. He apologized to the Fouliot family for hurting them all over again, then fell silent for a long time. The room was frozen in disbelief. No one spoke. Only the muffled sobs of a mother without her child and the cold scratch of a pen recording every word. The truth was now undeniable. No conspiracies, no second suspect. Jonathann Daval was the sole killer. In 2019, investigators reconstructed the crime scene. Under police supervision, Jonathann led them through every room of the house where the murder took place, then to the forest where he had hidden the body. He described in chilling detail how he had slapped and punched Alexia 5 to 10 times, then strangled her with both hands for about 4 minutes until she stopped moving. He then dragged her body to the car, wrapped it in a bedsheet, and drove to Esmollins. His voice remained flat, emotionless, as though recounting a routine task. He even admitted keeping Alexia's wedding ring, threading it onto a chain to wear around his neck as a talisman, as if clinging to a memory he himself had destroyed. Alexia's mother later revealed that right after describing the murder, Jonathann looked up and asked a question that froze her blood. "Is Happy okay?" referring to Alexia's cat. To her, that single question captured his monstrous detachment. A man who could strangle his wife to death and still worry about a pet, as if nothing irreparable had happened. That moment seared itself into the public consciousness, solidifying the image of Jonathann Daval as both cruel and calculating, a man who had hidden his true nature for years behind the mask of a gentle, grieving husband. Court-appointed psychologists spent months evaluating Jonathann Daval to uncover the deeper motives behind his crime. Their conclusion was unsettling. He was a man physically grown but emotionally arrested at the level of a child. He depended entirely on the women in his life, first his mother, then his wife, as the two pillars that gave him a sense of safety. When confronted with conflict, instead of expressing or resolving it, he retreated into silence, suppressing his anger until it became a ticking bomb. Experts determined that Jonathann suffered from no mental illness, no hallucinations, no delusions. He fully understood his actions and their consequences. The problem lay in his personality, his dependency, his fear of losing control, and his pathological need to maintain an image of perfection. His tragedy, they said, was the result of years of repression within a relationship strained by pressure, children, clashing temperaments, and the obsession with appearing flawless to the outside world. He lived through small lies that disguised his true emotions until he became two people: the gentle, likable son-in-law seen by the Fouliot family, and the dark, resentful man who felt inferior behind closed doors. Those psychological assessments were echoed in the courtroom in 2020 when Alexia's sister took the stand to face her sister's killer. Her voice was calm, but each word cut through the air like a blade. Lying is his way of life. she called Jonathann, a chameleon, a man who changed colors depending on his surroundings, presenting a different version of himself to everyone he met. To his in-laws, he was the attentive, polite husband. To his mother, the fragile little boy who needed protection. To his co-workers, a man pretending to be sick to skip work. To neighbors, a model runner with a quiet smile. She added, "He's like Peter Pan, someone who never grew up, afraid of responsibility, afraid of becoming a father." Her words made Jonathann tremble and then faint right there in court, as though the sight of his true self exposed before everyone was unbearable. The entire courtroom froze. At that moment, no one saw a grieving husband anymore, only a man who had run from reality until there was nowhere left to hide. Then, Alexia's father, Jean-Pierre Fouillot, took the stand. His face was drawn with exhaustion, but his eyes were steady, unwavering. His voice was low and roughened by 3 years of loss. 29 years of family happiness were destroyed by 3 months of deceit and 3 years of pain, he said. He called Jonathann the man who extinguished the light of our family, emphasizing that the betrayal after Alexia's death was even crueler than the murder itself. He recounted how, upon learning that Jonathann was the killer, he had embraced him thinking his son-in-law was suffering too. "Looking back, I realize I was too kind," he admitted, before locking eyes with the defendant. "I want the court to impose the maximum sentence so that my daughter may be respected, and the truth may finally rest." The courtroom fell silent. Many wept. And in that haunting moment, the contrast between the two men, one a father stripped of his child, the other a husband who destroyed his wife, became the defining image of the Daval case. On one side, infinite grief. On the other, the bottomless pit of deceit and self-destruction. The trial of Jonathann Daval officially began on the 16th of November 2020 in the city of Besançon, drawing nationwide attention across France. Dressed in a white shirt, his face gaunt and eyes downcast, Jonathann entered the courtroom, looking like a man already defeated. He admitted to killing his wife, but maintained it had been an accident, claiming that Alexia had emotionally abused him for years, and that he had lost control in a moment of weakness. His fragile defense was quickly dismantled by the prosecution, who exposed the contradictions in his testimony: the burning of the body, the remote location, the decision to bring gasoline, all clear signs of premeditation. When asked why he had set the body on fire, Jonathann mumbled vaguely, staring at the floor. At times, he broke down sobbing. At others, he sat motionless, hollow-eyed, as if emptied of all humanity. Witnesses, friends, colleagues, neighbors described him as polite and quiet, yet strangely unreadable, a man whose silence always seemed to hide something heavy and unspoken. The exchanges between the prosecution and the defense were suffocatingly tense. The prosecutor described the case as a near-perfect crime within marriage, a haunting phrase underscoring how Jonathann's actions were anything but impulsive. They argued he killed Alexia out of a fear of losing control, as she was beginning to assert her independence and step beyond his influence. His fear of abandonment, they said, had turned into obsession. The sheet wrapping, the drive into the woods, the use of gasoline, all revealed a terrifying lucidity. The defense, however, clung to its psychological narrative, portraying the killing as a crime of passion, triggered by prolonged stress and humiliation over his infertility. He did not plan to kill her, his lawyer insisted. He simply broke down in his weakest moment. The trial unfolded under a heavy, oppressive atmosphere. Alexia's sister took the stand and testified that her sibling had often confided in her about minor marital tensions, not because of physical abuse, but because of deep incompatibility. She described Alexia as cheerful, strong-willed, and full of life, while Jonathann was withdrawn, fragile, and habitually deceitful to avoid confrontation. She revealed that he had pretended to be estranged from his mother to win the Fouillot family's sympathy, and lied about his job to preserve the image of a perfect husband. Her words painted a clearer portrait of the marriage, What appeared to be a harmonious relationship was in truth built on silence, illusion, and cracks beneath the surface. Friends of Alexia testified that she had always tried to encourage Jonathann to be stronger, to believe in himself, and to step out of his shell. But perhaps that sincerity, her attempt to lift him up, was precisely what clashed with his fragile pride, planting the seed of resentment that would one day erupt into unimaginable violence. On the 21st of November 2020, after 5 grueling days of trial, the verdict was delivered. Jonathann Daval was sentenced to 25 years in prison for the murder of his wife. As the judge read the sentence, he stood motionless, hands clenched, eyes fixed on the floor, his face devoid of emotion. Only when people began leaving the courtroom did he turn to his in-laws and whisper twice, "I'm sorry," his voice breaking. It was a brief moment, but no one believed those words anymore. For the Fouillot family, any apology now was far too late. Outside the courthouse, Alexia's mother, Isabelle Fouillot, told reporters, "It's a very good decision, exactly what we hoped for, proportionate to our pain." She said the family could finally turn a page, though the loss could never truly be mended. The sentence was considered severe, yet for those who had lost their daughter, no punishment could ever balance the scales. They knew that in 2 decades, the man who killed her might walk free and rebuild a life, while Alexia would forever remain 29. Many called for life imprisonment, arguing that only that would be justice for her. But under French law, murder without aggravating circumstances, such as terrorism, carries a maximum of 30 years, and given Jonathann's confession and lack of prior offenses, 25 years was deemed proportionate. Still, for the public, legal justice is not emotional justice, and the Daval case left a wound deep in France's collective heart. In the wake of the verdict, France erupted in debate over what came to be known as the Jonathann case. It became a haunting symbol of domestic violence, where the killer is not a stranger lurking in the shadows, but the husband who shares the same bed. The case forced society to confront the deadly reality hidden behind facades of normalcy. Jonathann hadn't only killed his wife, he had deceived an entire nation. He had wept before television cameras, embraced his mother-in-law, read eulogies at the funeral, attended vigils, all while secretly knowing that his hands had taken her life. The betrayal was not just in the act of murder, but in the months of deceit that followed, turning the grief of others into a stage for his own false display of virtue. The images from 2017 now return like a nightmare. 10,000 people marching in silence, holding candles, raising photos of Alexia among them, the killer himself crying. At the time, he was seen as the embodiment of grief, the heartbroken husband who had lost the love of his life. But when the truth emerged, all of France recoiled in horror at the realization that they had been deceived. For the residents of Gray, that memory still lingers painfully. The gentle neighbor with the soft smile, the man seen every morning jogging beside his wife, was in fact harboring a quiet, festering hatred that would end in murder. The contrast between the murderer's tears and his brutality forced the French public to ask a haunting question: was Jonathann truly remorseful or merely performing? Psychologists described him as having a pathological need to be loved, a compulsion to manipulate others' emotions through deceit. When cornered, he had no hesitation in betraying his own family, accusing his brother-in-law to save himself. Only when confronted with the photograph of Alexia's cat, the last trace of the peaceful life he destroyed, did he finally collapse. For a fleeting moment, people glimpsed what might have been a spark of conscience, but it came far too late to redeem him. Throughout the trial, the subject of family surfaced repeatedly. Alexia's longing to become a mother, Jonathann's wounded pride and sense of inadequacy. From that, a nationwide debate erupted in France about reproductive pressure and the fragile role of masculinity within marriage. Yet, no matter the circumstances, experts were unanimous: violence is never an answer. Jonathann Daval stood as a tragic example of emotional dishonesty and the collapse of communication in marriage. Simple, fundamental things that too often vanish beneath layers of fear, and expectation. The 25-year sentence closed the legal chapter, but not the wound. The Fouillot family lost their daughter, and with her, the trust they once placed in the man who had called them Mom and Dad. Isabelle Fouillot said she could never forgive him, but she would keep her daughter's memory as a light that will never fade. The Daval case became a national warning about domestic violence in France, where hundreds of women are still killed each year by the men they love. In Alexia's name, a foundation was created to support abused women, offering self-defense classes and legal aid. From unimaginable grief, a message was born. No one should ever remain silent in the face of violence, and justice begins with the courage to speak. When the courtroom doors finally closed, Jonathann Daval disappeared from the glare of the media and stepped into the confined, monotonous life of prison, where he would have no one left to confront but himself. Behind bars, he enrolled in educational programs, wrote letters of remorse, and tried to rebuild a relationship with his mother. Some said he seemed calm, compliant, even eager to reform. But to many others, it was merely the continuation of a performance he had perfected too well. Throughout the investigation, he had done everything possible to soften his image, denying guilt, shifting blame, weaving lies to save himself. Could a man who once looked his in-laws in the eye and lied without hesitation ever truly repent? The Fouillot family made it clear they would never see him again, never speak his name. To them, Jonathann had died the same day as Alexia. With a 25-year sentence, Jonathann will walk free in middle age into a world that no longer has a place for him. Freedom, at least on paper, will not free him from himself. He will forever carry the mark of wife killer, living under the contemptuous gaze of society and the silent disgust of his own reflection. For France, the Daval case remains a collective scar, a reminder of how fragile happiness can be, and how thin the line between love and control truly is. In the years since the verdict, the French media have slowly stopped mentioning Jonathann's name. People no longer want to see the face that once cried before cameras, or hear more belated confessions of regret. Instead, they choose to remember Alexia. On social media, friends and colleagues share radiant photos. Alexia, in her running gear, smiling brightly on a forest path, or clasping hands with teammates at charity events. In the town of Gray, residents erected a small memorial stone along the trail where she once ran each morning. Fresh flowers are always there, sometimes roses, sometimes sprigs of lavender. Her favorite, Life Has Moved On, but not untouched. Each bloom placed at that memorial stands as a quiet act of defiance against silence, against violence, and against forgetting. And somewhere in that quiet corner of Gray, where the wind moves gently through the trees, Alexia's presence still lingers, no longer as a victim, but as a symbol of strength, freedom, and the unspoken promise that her story will not fade. From a legal standpoint, the Jonathann Daval case became both a demonstration of justice's strength and a reminder of its limits. Many in France had called for a harsher sentence, even life imprisonment, believing that a man who not only killed his wife, but also framed an innocent relative, deserved no leniency whatsoever. Yet the law cannot operate on emotion. It must follow rules, evidence, and due process. Within the French judicial system, a defendant's confession, cooperation with investigators, and lack of prior convictions are considered mitigating factors. Still, many legal experts argued that Jonathann's shifting statements, his repeated denials, his false accusations, and only eventual confession revealed calculation rather than remorse, making his display of repentance difficult for the public to accept. When the case finally closed, the debate evolved into something deeper. Can society ever truly forgive someone like Jonathann Daval? Some believe that time may soften pain, that forgiveness is not for the perpetrator, but for the survivors to allow them to live without being imprisoned by hatred. Yet most agree that forgiveness does not mean forgetting. For Alexia's parents, the loss is eternal, but perhaps there is a measure of peace in knowing that justice was served, that their daughter, the light of the family, had her dignity restored. And perhaps, in the silence of gray, beside the small memorial stone along the trail where Alexia once ran, justice and memory now coexist, standing together as a quiet reminder that truth, no matter how deeply buried, will always find its way back into the light.